want to welcome everyone here tonight. Thank you for being here. I'm going to ask the clerk to announce the meeting and call the roll.
A special session is being held on Thursday, June 26, 2014, regarding the county administrator's draft performance evaluation and a CDBG follow-up. Roll call. Markley.
Here.
Walters. Philbrook.
Here.
Walker. Townsend.
Here.
McKiernan.
Here.
Mugia. Maddox.
Here.
Kane.
Here.
Holland.
Here. All right, tonight we're going to begin with County Administrator Performance Evaluation. This was contemplated at the time of the hire of Mr. Bach when we solicited an RFP for a search firm, a professional search firm. One of the parts of their proposal was to help us put together a performance evaluation for the immediately for the person we hired, using the stipulations that we used in the hiring process. Mr. Bob Slavin was here a couple weeks ago to work on this with us. He has had an emergency health issue in the family and is not able to be with us tonight, but we have his input in this document, and certainly he's available if anyone would have any questions for him. I've been working on this with Mr. Bach in terms of coming up with this, and I want to make sure everyone has the most recent iteration that you just received this week. It should have come in tomorrow. You received a draft last week just to kind of get you thinking about it. Some significant alterations. So if you don't have the one that came this week, let me know. I have another one for you. 624. All right, let's pass those down. Anyone this way need it? All right. Well, open it up on the first page. If you open it up on the first page, the first one, that's it. Got it. Okay. So what I want to say about this is one of the things is Mr. Bach and I were talking, what if we made this a tool that was actually usable? One of the concerns I saw in the previous evaluations was that really the only thing that was evaluated for the previous administrator evaluation that I participated in were really the kind of the soft skills, the relationship between the administrator and the commission, but not really the objective goals that we've set out as a commission. So as we started looking at those goals, we have 9 goals that we've set out as a commission. And as I looked at those, the challenge was not to, some of our goals that our administrator has direct responsibility for and is frankly responsible for carrying out. Some of the other goals are indirect goals that the administrator supports, but they're commission goals that we carry out. So let me give you an example. Public safety, the administrator directly oversees public safety and directly impacts and moves those departments. When you get to housing as another one of our goals, our goal for housing is develop policies and programs that grow neighborhoods to their maximum potential, make property owners accountable for their property, and foster a diverse housing stock. If we're going to evaluate, are we evaluating the administrator, or are we evaluating the housing stock in Kansas City, Kansas? Has it maintained its full potential? We want to make sure we're evaluating the job performance of the administrator. And so what I've done, and this is a draft, it's got draft on every page. What I am proposing tonight is that we break up the evaluation into 2 sections in terms of goals, one for the direct commission goals and one for the support goals, and evaluate it. So I want to walk through this with you. The 3rd section would be administrative focus areas, and the 4th section would be more of the professional relations as it pertains to the commission, the staff, and the public. So we've tried to break it up into the different categories. So hopefully you've had time to read this and look at it yourself. But from a process perspective, whatever document we adopt as a commission, I would expect that every quarter the administrator would come give us a report with this as a template, walking through the 4 areas of public safety, or however many we settle on, walk through the 2 issues of infrastructure, customer service, innovation, walk through all of those with us and give us a quarterly update, so that when we come into September, we can do an evaluation based on real updates on the actual tool And then, after we do the evaluation in September, we go into our strategic plan in October and have an opportunity to adjust our goals. And when we adjust our goals, we should adjust the administrator's goals in terms of how the administrator is going to carry those out. Does that make sense? And then we would be on track for the year. So my proposal is this, that in the end of September, Mr. Bach would give us an update based on this template. We would do his first evaluation, which is within the first 6 months. When we first did the hire, we agreed that the first evaluation would be within 6 months, not a full year. We'd do that first evaluation. We'd revise our goals and the administrator's goals in October at strategic plan, receive a quarterly update, and then the following September, do another annual evaluation that would put the annual evaluation the month before the strategic plan each year. So that gives us a little bit of a flow. Evaluate the administrator and how the goals were fulfilled, evaluate the goals themselves, reset the administrator's goals, and go through the next year. Do you see that flow? I think there's a logic to it. Hopefully it's a logic you subscribe to, or you have a better logic that we can adopt today. But what I'd like, so that's kind of the vision of it. So what I'd like to do is kind of walk through the instrument piece by piece and then get some feedback in terms of how we do it. But I will say, I want to thank Jason in my office, Mr. Bach, and Mr. Slavin. We put in quite a bit of time in this to really make it a working document. I don't want the evaluation of the administrator to be a perfunctory operation that we just do because we're supposed to. I think it should actually advance our goals from there. So any questions about the process before we start walking through it? All right. The first thing is public safety. So I took the liberty, and you're welcome to disagree with me, of taking our 9 goals and breaking them into direct and indirect based on what I thought. And this is a draft, so if you think one should be direct or one should be indirect, we can move it, or we can not use this rubric at all. But the ones that I thought were direct were public safety, infrastructure, and economic development. I also added 2 other areas that we have not formally adopted as our goals, but we talked about at our last strategic plan in March, and that is customer service and innovation. And so those 5 would be the direct goals, and then the support goals, starting on the next page, would be housing, education, workforce development, multimodal transportation, social services, healthy community and recreation, and environment. So for the first goals, we would evaluate exactly how the administrator has carried those out, and for the support goals, we would evaluate based on the level of how the county administrator has supported the efforts of the commission in carrying those out. Does that make sense? Clear as mud? So the first piece is kind of the rubric. Is it acceptable to kind of break up the goals in that way from direct and indirect? People supportive of that? Does it make sense? I mean, it seemed to make some logic, but does it make sense to everybody? Now, what I want to do is walk through those goals and make sure that we have the goals that we want to set for the administrator to fulfill, probably not just for this first 6 months, but for the year. Public safety, maintain overall quality of service delivery. Develop a sustainable budget to maintain overall service delivery. Complete studies for fire, police, fire, and sheriff/jail. Advancement of Department of Justice initiative and implementation of recruiting efforts to increase hiring of local and minority candidates. So those are the first ones. Commissioner McKiernan?
You know, whoa, that's on loud. I'll push it back. You touched on this a minute ago, but really some of these, as I look at them, the first 2, A and B, those seem like those will be ongoing. That's just going to be a continuing thing that we look at and evaluate. But on this one, C and D look like they're ad hoc.
That's right. That's right.
And you mentioned that, but I think we may want to mark those somehow so that we can see at a glance which ones are time limited. We expect to accomplish them, and then they're going to go away and we're going to find another one to move on. So somehow to notate on here which ones are ongoing and which are ad hoc. And then another thing, and this is the problem of all evaluations like this, occasionally we're going to have to come up with a rubric to decide what do we mean by, what does it mean to maintain, for example, and this is jumping ahead to 2A, but Well, number 1A, maintains overall quality of service delivery. So what's the metric for that? Is it more subjective? Is it more objective? I don't have any answers. Those are just some of the thoughts that start to pop to my head.
Okay? Commissioner Markley?
I was just going to echo that and say, Brian and I are big on the SMART goals, that if you're going to have something that we can tell is time-bound, we need to tell what that timeline is, within reason. I mean, we're obviously, they do this at my company, and you set a goal, and a lot of times you don't meet it on the timeline proposed, but the idea is if you don't put a deadline on it, then we have a tendency to procrastinate and push things out. So if we know it's one of these that's time-limited, we should give that timeline. And if it's not time limited, I think Brian hit the nail on the head. How do we know if we're maintaining the overall quality? Can we tie it to some kind of statistic? Like when it comes to crime, it's actually an easier one maybe than others, because you can say keeps crime below X percent or doesn't let it go up from last year, whatever that looks like. I don't know what the exact formula is for that, but the more concrete we can make it, the easier that makes it for all of us, really. For Doug to know when he's hitting it well, and for us to know when we're evaluating him, we're all kind of like, well, is this is it quality? Is it not quality? If we have that statistic to go by, we're all going to be more easily on the same page and saying yes, he achieved it, or no, he didn't.
Well, and I think this is one of the things we've wrestled with extensively was, for instance, in public safety. There are two issues in terms of, do we evaluate the outcome in some respects, like the crime statistics? Has the crime gone up or down? If the crime went up, does he get marked down for that? And if crime went down, does he get marked up for that? Versus his role as administrator in operating the organization, of the accountability with the command staff and the relationship with the command staff and making sure it's being well run. That there is, in some respects, there's both. And then what I didn't want, without having a 12-page evaluation, I didn't want to evaluate how he's doing maintaining sheriff's department, how he's doing maintaining police department, how he's doing maintaining fire department. I wanted to do an overall, but I agree, we've got to balance it between quantitative and qualitative, and at least spell out which it is, so that there's a metric we can work on. Commissioner Kane.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. On number 4, is there a difference in the Department of Justice, what they think we're supposed to do and what we're doing?
I've invited the Department of Justice in to evaluate our recruiting efforts for public safety. And so we're doing some preliminary data gathering right now, and then I'm expecting to have a presentation to the commission at the end of the summer in terms of how that data gathering is going. But the Department of Justice initiative, because we've invited them in, we're in the driver's seat in terms of how that looks. If they had come to us and said, this is what you need to do, then we're on their timeline. So I think we have we're I would suggest, in the driver's seat in terms of how this initiative is being carried out by the Department of Justice and what we're asking them to look at. But right now, we're at the stage of just gathering data from our different departments, from all the other departments, police, fire, and sheriff, to look at the demographics of our organization and to see if there are discrepancies in there. And there are, we already know that. And so, but the advancement of that initiative is something that we need the support from the administrator to make sure it happens.
And I'd like some information as we go, when they find stuff out.
Absolutely. We need to do it, once this data is gathered, we'll need to do a full presentation to the commission in a special session so you see everything that's going on.
All right.
Absolutely. Commissioner Maddox.
Thank you, Mayor. That was my same question. I had hit my button before Mike had asked it, but I had seen, again, under number 1, letter D, that spoke to the Department of Justice, and for whatever reason, just not up to date as to what that is. And so to have that on here and, to concur with it was somewhat a question, but if we are going to have that presentation, then that matters. But that was the first time saying that.
Okay. All right. Let's kind of circle your thoughts, because we may need to just take the feedback and come back with a draft. So I don't want to wordsmith it here, but this is good feedback. Let's keep moving. Infrastructure, maintain overall quality and service delivery. Again, back to Markley's point, how do you quantify that? Is it qualitative or quantitative? Presents annual CMIP plan that balances resources and needs. customer service. This is, I put new on here because this isn't part of our last October strategic plan, but came out of our survey. It was really tops in our survey. Develops culture of customer service for external customers and develops culture of customer service for internal departments, trying to differentiate really the two components of customer service, one to our constituents and one viewing the other departments as constituents. Innovation establishes a strategy to make all unified government data more accessible to internal and external customers. Establishes a strategy to review IT systems and service delivery standards. Establishes a strategy to enhance interdepartmental information sharing and development of new innovative service delivery procedures. Commissioner McKiernan.
Thank you, Mayor. One thing that just kind of popped into my head here as I was thinking about these is, to what extent do we factor in budget? To what extent does the availability of funding either enable or disable achievement of a particular goal? So it may be something that, from the administrator's point of view, he works and has done a fantastic job, but simply doesn't have the resources to accomplish. So to what point do resources factor into the rating?
No, and I think this is the dance that we have to walk. I mean, this is exactly the reality, because we could set standards for our administrator and then not fund any of it and show that he failed, right? So, I mean, there's the opportunity for sabotage is always there. So, but the key is we don't want to do that. We want to set it up to succeed. But I think when we come back and say develop a culture of customer service in the quarterly reports, and this is where the quarterly reports are going to come in, if he comes in the budget and says, I think if we added this position, it's really going to enhance our customer service, and we decide not to do that, well, he's going to have to come up with another plan and give us a quarterly update. But it might be that we decided not to fund one of these initiatives, and so he's going to come back and say, we still don't have any funding for this initiative, I'm still not doing anything on it. But here are the ones that are funded that I am working on, that I am able to work on. But I think one of the things I want to make this is an ongoing dialogue on a quarterly basis rather than a once a year. Does anybody remember what happened during this? So we're actually up to date on it. But McKiernan, I think your point is well taken. He can only put forward a recommendation, and if we don't fund it, then we need to balance how we accommodate that in terms of our evaluation. Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you, Mayor. This echoes some points already made with holding the administrator responsible or evaluating him for those things that are within his ambit to control.
That's right.
And metrics. And so as I looked at the second group, or maybe it's the third group we're talking about of things, I'm wondering, don't have an answer, if some of the simplest things, especially with that, did you develop a culture of customer service? Is it yes or no? What's the difference between a 2, a 3, a 4? That goes back to the metrics or lack thereof. We might just consider in taking these same subject points or talking points, is it a yes or no kind of thing? And we can count how many people thought yes or how many people thought no. Just a point of evaluating the performance tied to the metrics or lack thereof. That's what I'm looking at. It's just essential to hold people accountable for what they can control. And then beyond that, what's the difference between a 3 and a 4 or 2 and a 3? Yes or no, you did it or you didn't. That might be something else when we're looking at finalizing this to take into account.
Okay, thank you. All right, the last one on direct is economic development. Again, there's some, we can just walk through these. Establishes economic development strategy that continues to advance projects in industrial, commercial, retail, and housing. Establishes strategy for small business support. Manages major economic development projects in the community, and promotes economic development in urban areas. One of the things, too, that we talked about in this was to make sure we are evaluating things that that the administrator spends time doing. We could say go find new projects, but also managing major economic development projects that we're already doing. Actually, it was Mr. Bach's role as deputy, and has continued to be his role as the as the county administrator, making sure we're giving credit for the work that's being done on a day-to-day basis and understanding that. Mr. McKiernan?
Thanks. Just as I look through these, I continue to kind of mark these over here, ongoing ad hoc. To
Yes.
whom should I send those notes?
Me.
To you. Okay,
Please.
thank you.
I'm trying to take notes as we go to make sure that we consider it. Oh, that'd be great. Maddox.
Thank you. Again, and maybe someone has already asked this question, but how will this rubric or this evaluation be graded? So every commissioner does it. How do we decide whether the county administrator has failed or was successful? And then that's the question ultimately, because once we take it, who grades it? Or what are the numbers that are calculated, and what are we exactly looking for?
That's a very good question. So what we would do is, and this is the way it's been done in the past, I would submit this to all the commissioners. Every commissioner would have time to fill it out. You would get it back to me to tabulate, and obviously that tabulation would be available for everybody to see, for all the commissioners to see, because it is a personnel issue, and we would perform the actual the evaluation itself would be done in executive session because it's a personnel matter. The discussion of the criteria for evaluation is actually public discussion. The public deserves to know what we're evaluating the administrator on. The actual evaluation itself would be confidential. So you would turn those into me, and we would all have our sheet. And then what I would anticipate doing is my staff would tabulate those scores. And to the point of giving yes, no versus 1 through 5, 1 being did not meet expectations, 5 is exceeded expectations, you could give a number to say on economic development in terms of 5D, promotes economic development in urban areas. We would have a score by average of everyone. That would be whatever it would be, 4.5, or, if it didn't happen at all, 1.5. And we could look down the list of all these criteria and see the areas that were very strong with a high number, 4s and 5s, the numbers that were average and 3s, and the numbers that were low. And presumably, like most evaluations, you would address the ones that are low and say, why are they low? What do we need to do to raise those? And for instance, if it were something like open data, and we said, well, we all gave you 1s in that, and he says, well, you didn't fund any open data in the budget when I gave you the opportunity. We can talk at that point about why that area is low and another area is high. And then after we accumulate those numbers, I think people could look at, and we could give overall scores for sections. That for the direct goals, he had an average of 4, 4.5, or whatever it is. For the support commission goals, he had an average of 4.2 or whatever. I mean, you could look at what areas we think the administrator's strong in and what areas we think the administrator's weaker in. And then we have the conversation about the message we want to deliver to the administrator. And presumably, in the context of that, we would have an executive session. We'd all sit down and talk to the administrator together and go over it together. But I think this is feedback, and I'll let Mr. Bach speak to this. This is feedback that's very helpful to an administrator to know what areas the commission feels like he's doing well and which areas the commission feels like he's not doing well. I mean, do you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of thoughts, and listening to the discussion, I think about this. It's important for all of you to all think of it. This is our working document. It's not anything you have to walk out of here tonight, or even when you say that's what we want to go with and say, okay, it's fixed. It's just like when you set out a measure to say, accomplish this open data. You'll have this accomplished. We expect this to be done by 2015. If we work through the budget process and we don't really fund up where we want to do this year, and then we move into the fall and we sit down at this first session, and I could lay out at that time to say, okay, this is one of your goals. This is what I was going to try to accomplish in open data. That strategy is not going to work from this 2015 timeframe, the way I'd planned it. But then, so maybe there's a modification, maybe it's a date modification, or maybe it's a modification of what that date is. And I think a lot of that can factor into various things too. You can look at the, like the culture of customer service commissioners, you say yes or no. The other alternative on that is, as you're looking at it is, yeah, that could be very subjective for any one of you. You could say, well, no, I'm giving you a 1 or a 5 based on something, but it is an opportunity for me to also come to you and say, okay, in order to foster a cultural customer service within the organization, these are the steps I took. This is what we did this year. This is how I worked with employees. This is what training we did. Now, you could still come to that overall grading and say, well, you didn't get it done because here's what I've heard from some people in this area. But I guess I would look at that to say, okay, that's still a challenge. It's an area we need to work on. But I would get some credit for working it as the administrator to try to do things and try to train the employees and get them there and change that environment. So those are steps that could be in that way. And it's also one too, when you look at a metric for public safety, I could probably grade that as that's an area that there's a whole lot of areas that I could succeed and there's a whole lot of areas that I could fail. I mean, on its face, we start to think, well, there's your police, there's your fire department. We also have the sheriff operations and what's conducted there with the detention operations for both adult and juvenile. We have the relationships with the district attorney. We have the relationships with district court operation, what goes on there. We have how our process servers work and the field work that they're doing on a daily basis, you know. And we also have what goes on with community corrections, you know, not to mention some other related fields that come into it. So there's not 1 or 2 metrics that are going to grade, you know, something that really accounts to 70% of our budget when we come into it. So I think we have to think about some of these factors when we say maybe, and I know when I talked to the mayor on that one, it was kind of like, okay, maintain overall quality of service delivery. That's a little bit of my explanation about what we've done to maintain that or what we're not doing, you know, as we go through and work on these. And then I think I really like the aspect is doing this now, coming into October. You know, that's not a time where I'm hoping you're all thinking, well, okay, we're full grading at that point. You know, it's really kind of like, okay, those are the goals we set out. We start talking about what can be achieved or what can't be achieved and what you all think I should be or should not be doing in those areas, and then we start to work on it from there. And we could go through it at that time, and if you rewrite half of them, okay. I mean, it's not like we've done anything wrong at that point. It's our document. It's our goal sheet to sit down and say, Mr. Administrator, this is what we want you to do, and this is how we expect you to do it, and I'm supposed to give you the feedback as to whether or not I think I can, or, you know, what's practical to be put within it. So that's just my feedback, and then listening to your comments.
Well, and I think if we look back at the first one, public safety, complete studies for police, fire, and sheriff/jail. You know, by the time he gives his first quarterly update in September, those studies are not going to be complete. But he should have an update to say, okay, we've talked to the fire, we've talked to police, talked to sheriff. These are the timelines we're starting to put forward. I've put these studies in the budget for 2015. The fire's already in the budget, but we've got police and sheriff. We're putting those in for 2015, and here's kind of the timelines. And then after we come back first of the year, and he gives gives the first quarter update, or the end of the year and gives that fourth quarter update, he can say, okay, this is the progress I've made. You know, this study is moving along very quickly. We found a group that we liked, and we're moving forward. This group we're having some challenges with, but we're still working it. So we get a quarterly update on how each of those studies is going. And as it's very likely that one study will be completed before another one's even started, but then the goal shifts to carrying out the recommendations of that study, right? And so it might be maybe the fire study, because we've been planning that longer, gets done first. In the 2016 cycle, we're actually looking at implementing the recommendations from that study while we're still just getting the study done for police and sheriff. Does that make sense? So we're going to have to be, that's why I want this to be an active living document, because as things are accomplished, the goal for that is going to shift. But we need to keep an update, because just because, I would say if he comes back next year, this time next year, or in September of next year, and says we've completed the fire study, moving to the implementation study, we've got the police study underway, and we're getting ready, we've done the RFP, and we're getting ready to start the sheriff's study. Well, I'd grade him a 5, because he's on it. He's on all of them. Now, that doesn't mean they're all done, but he means he's on them. So that's, I think, the kind of the subjective piece of this is the reason for the ongoing dialogue. There could be something else that comes up that, I don't know what it is. You know, we get a grant to do a jail study, and we advance that ahead of the others. And so in the quarterly update, he said, I know you're planning on doing the fire study first, but I just got a grant to do a jail study from Department of Justice. I think we ought to jump on that one first and put the others to the side so we can get this one done. Well, I'd support that. Somebody paid for one of these studies, yes? So that's going to be the dialogue component that I'm hoping is going to be true for all of these goals. And I don't think we have to perfect it for this September. I think we have to start it. And I think in doing it, we're going to get a good idea to how to improve it. Because we're going to be talking about it every quarter. And we're going to be evaluating every year. So, okay. First section, direct goals are done. The second half is a little, let's talk about it. Support commission goals. And I'll read the verbiage on this. These goals over which the county administrator provides support for the commission to advance. Evaluation will be based on the level of the county administrator's supportive efforts. So, for instance, in housing, developing policies and programs. Well, McKiernan and Markley have been working actively on some housing issues. Those have not been issues that the administrator is directly involved in, but his staff is involved in. And if the staff's not supporting the effort of these two, it wouldn't be going anywhere. Because that involves a legal team, it involves codes team, it involves a lot of different departments. And so the evaluation would be, is our housing where we want it to be? Well, maybe it's not. But has the administrator provided adequate support for those housing initiatives? I think we can rank the level of support for that. Does that make sense? Same with education workforce development. Maintains a collaborative working relationship with various education institutions and the business community to maximize community resources and enhance learning, college readiness, and career pathway opportunities in our community. That's language directly out of our strategic plan. The administrator is not directly responsible for education workforce development, but we can evaluate how supportive he's been for the efforts that are ongoing. So this one, again, is subjective, but I think it speaks to the nature of the goals we've adopted. Mr. Walker? Speak directly into
Do
the
I
microphone.
understand you correctly that if he delegates responsibility for housing to one of his assistants, aren't we holding him accountable and evaluating him on the performance of the people he chooses in his office?
I would think so.
Okay. Well,
Absolutely.
As long as that's, I mean, he may be very supportive and very, very good, and he may have a lousy assistant,
Present company excluded, obviously.
obviously, but I just wanted to make sure he was accountable for wherever he delegates the responsibility.
Well,
for
that's
projects.
because here's the bottom line. He's going to be hiring a new police chief. If the police department descends into chaos, it's his evaluation, right?
Yeah,
because he's
exactly.
picking the fire, he's picking the
Right.
police chief. So I think that's, and if it rises to all new greater heights, he should get full credit for that. So I think that's the, yeah, that's exactly right. So yes, we will be evaluating, because I think the level of support that he provides, he can't provide personally support for all of this. He couldn't possibly. But he sure ought to have a team in place that can provide the support that we need. Okay. Multimodal transportation, very similar. Social services, very similar. Healthy community recreation, very similar. Environment, very similar. That language for each of those 6 is pulled directly out of our strategic plan. I will make a note that we can talk about in October. 6 of our 9 goals are indirect. I mean, we just might want to think about that. Because I hear Commissioner Markley and Commissioner McKiernan frequently say, how do we measure it? And so we might want to decide, do we want to continue with goals after October if we're not sure how we're going to measure them?
What do
Right, so, but they're on there now, so they're on here, right? Because I also don't think, if we have it as a goal, the administrator has to pay attention to it at some level. If we don't want him paying attention to it, it's probably not one of our, we should probably get rid of it as a goal. Well, certainly and I think that's going to be part of the quarterly update. As we come in and we say, well, you asked me to work on this, and friends, there's not much to do here. You might want to reevaluate this. That's feedback that his professional opinion should be giving us on a regular basis. All right, the next one is administrative focus areas, and this comes back to what I said earlier. To make sure we're evaluating, there's an enormous amount of time in administration that his title actually suggests, administrator, that we need to be evaluating. So personnel, establishes strategy for employee compensation, healthcare, and benefits. Establishes performance evaluation review system for all UG employees. Reviews and fills key positions across the organization. This performance evaluation system is essential. That's been missing the last few years. He's working on that. But I also like establishing a strategy for employee compensation, healthcare, and benefits. That consumes a lot of our conversation and budget, but we need the administrator to provide a strategy for those. And then in finance, just 2, develops the budget. And again, this is time sensitive because it's a 2015 budget, and that will shift to the 2016 budget. Note, following the commission timetable that we've adopted. And I would say to a T, the budget this year has followed the commission timetable, and that's been very successful. And then develops a 5-year budget strategy. This is one that I was interested in, and Mr. Bach was interested in as well. We do CMIP theoretically 5 years out, but it's not even all that firm. I'd like to see a little firmer projections, a little firmer evaluation in terms of the budget from a 5-year perspective, because its challenges we're dealing with are not 1-year challenges. And so if we can look at a 5-year plan, I think we could get further ahead. But those are the only administrative focus areas that I have listed. So I'm open to suggestions on that. The final section, section 4, is professional relations. And as I stated at the outset, when I looked at the previous evaluation we did, when I first became a commissioner, these were the only areas really that were evaluated. I looked at the previous tool. There weren't a lot related to commission goals. It was all soft skills. And so, but I think they're important, so they're on here. So number 1, keeps mayor and commission informed of current and future plans, establishes open and efficient channels of communication, and maintains professional rapport with the governing body. And as I heard Mr. Bach say, this is great feedback to have, even on a quarterly basis, to know how is he doing, because his success in this organization is directly related to this rapport and communication. And that's important for us to evaluate and give feedback on. 2 is staff clearly communicates throughout the organization the goals and priorities of the governing body, projects a positive image and leadership qualities, and cultivates a positive and productive work culture. And then with the public, projects a professional public image, works to earn the trust and respect of community members, and encourages open dialogue with community members. So it has an elected official, a staff, and a public element in the personal relations. Commissioner Kane.
Thank you, Mayor. One of the things I think that if we think the administrator is doing something wrong, I don't think we ought to wait once a quarter. Mr. Bach is we've never had a crossword that I know about, but if you've got an issue and you ask him a question, he's going to give you the answer. Now you may not like the answer, but I don't think we should wait if there is an issue with not just him, but any of the staff that we work with. Say, hey, Jason Banks is my perfect example. We speak frankly, and I think that's what we need to do.
Oh, that's right.
Is when we're upset, Jason, that we tell the folks, hey, so we can get to the next level, because we don't want to hold this and make this a small problem, a big problem when we're doing the evaluation.
I appreciate your saying that, Commissioner, because again, this is a tool for communication. So if I agree, if there's an issue that comes up, we need to take it directly to the person immediately. And I trust this group does that on a regular basis. So I think we're off to a good start with that. But it is true that even quarterly checking in, it'd be something to say, I heard there was a communication issue with this a month ago. This is what I worked to resolve it. I got the feedback immediately. But I think in the quarterly updates, can even address some of the hiccups that have come through the quarter. Because here's my thing. It's one thing to have someone who never makes a mistake, but it's another thing to hear how someone who does make a mistake responds to it, right? Because the response is usually more important than the mistake itself. And I think that having an opening communication, there's only one person I know of that walked on water, and he was not available for this position. So now we're dealing with people. So I think the key is there's going to be miscommunications. There's going to be stuff that doesn't go just right. But I think we're evaluating not on is there a perfect line of communication at all times, but when the bumps hit, how does he respond in a professional way? Because that's what matters, and that's what we need. So I think this gives us a format for the dialogue on those issues. Commissioner McKiernan.
Completely agree with Commissioner Kane. I do think that it's really important that we communicate clearly and quickly at all times. But the quarterly report, the summary is nice. And this gets off the topic just for a second a little bit, but do I remember correctly that we are developing similar communication and feedback tools across the organization? That it's not just Mr. Bach that we're going to suddenly have feedback and evaluation, but we're doing this across the organization, correct?
Yes, I've put out review systems with the whole organization. So we're moving through our non-union personnel in 2014, and then we'll have the whole organization put in place in 2015.
All right. So this is the tool and the process that we're anticipating. I have taken notes. I would ask for those of you that take a lot of notes to please send those to me or give them to me after the meeting. And what I will plan to do is to review that, put that feedback into a revised draft, and run that by this group again, just to make sure we're all on the same page, knowing that this is a living document, that we're not going to etch it in stone, we're going to print it on paper, and after the first quarter, if we say, yeah, that goal didn't make any sense, what are we thinking? Certainly we should change it. And I would hope that same feedback from Mr. Bach as he goes through. He says, I agreed to this goal, but after a couple months of working it, I don't see it going anywhere. We need to think about it. I think we need to be open to that feedback on an ongoing basis. All right, anything else before we close? All right. I'm pretty excited about it. I think it's a pretty good tool.
Because it's evaluating you.
Yeah.
Doug looks really excited too.
All right.
I appreciate the feedback. I'll welcome it.
All right, that concludes that portion of the county administrator performance. We now need to turn, and let me just say this. I would say in the first few months, it has been a delight, Mr. Bach, to work with you, and I think you're doing an outstanding job out of the gate. I don't feel like we've missed a beat in the organizational operations, in our development, in our economic development, and certainly in our budget preparation. So the transition, from my perspective, has gone very well, and I appreciate your good hard work in this area.
Thank
You bet. All right, that brings us to our next topic, which is CDBG. Mr. Bach, I'll let you tee that up.
Okay. I believe the setup tonight is that we were going to let the committee report out on what their recommendations were coming forward from their subcommittee report. So Commissioner Markley, I believe you're on point for that this evening, unless there's something you'd like Mr. Criswell to do in advance.
No, thank you.
All right.
So I'm not sure how I drew the short straw, but I was given the duty of sort of summarizing what we as a committee have done over the past month or so. So the committee's met 3 times since the end of May until today. We met to discuss a couple of items. So what I report today is going to tell you what we've discussed thus far. We had a couple of assignments. One of those was to talk about our upcoming budget and the reallocation of funds that were not spent from the last budget. And then the larger part of our assignment was to work on the upcoming 5-year plan, because we're in the last year of this 5-year plan. I will tell you, we have not even gotten near that discussion. We had just spent these last 3 meetings working out the upcoming year's budget and the reallocation of funds. So don't expect your 5-year plan report tonight is my advice to you. I think that'll be a larger process. So we met on May 29th for the first time. We just started talking through those reallocations, which I'm going to share with you some of that information in a minute. I just want to kind of summarize what our meeting schedule looked like. We discussed the action plan, and we discussed having a meeting with the HUD representatives, which did happen on June 19th. Our second meeting was June 5th. We finalized the information that WILBA needed to be able to present the draft action plan, which included those reallocations. And then we discussed our future meetings. We talked about the schedule for when we would talk about that 5-year plan. We're going to start talking about that after this year's budget, so don't expect to see anything until August or September. We'll start meeting again to lay out that longer-term plan. And then on June 19th, we did have representatives from the HUD office come and meet with us. Commissioner Philbrook got to come and sit in with us for that one. It was just sort of an educational experience for us to have our local office representatives come in and talk to us about what they recommend as far as how CDBG funds are spent. So it was really educational. It's nice to meet them in person. I think they're going to be really, really helpful for us in setting out our new 5-year plan and in learning how to leverage funds in different ways. They have a lot of connections that we may have and just haven't been using, or that we don't have at all, that they're going to be able to bring forward for us. So overall, I think it's been good. Now we're going to find out if I can work the clicker. Maybe? Oh, yes. Okay. So this is, you've seen something similar to this before, as WILBA has brought forward budget proposals, so hopefully it doesn't look totally unfamiliar. What you will notice on here is, okay, so we have our amounts, our status, and then over on the far column, it talks a little bit about just what discussions we had as a committee. These are the reallocation funds. By the way, Wilba, if I say anything wrong, please correct me. Trying to summarize all of this is more difficult than you would think, actually. Reallocations happen because either something came in under budget or it just wasn't spent for whatever reason in the prior year, so we've got to find something else to do with it. Am I right? See, my simple way of explaining it. We have to find something else to do with it in the upcoming year. So as you'll see here, we have a list of things that needed to be reallocated. Some of them, the $8,006, the project is underway, it says. So that means the funds haven't been spent yet, but they're going to be spent, is the anticipation. And then there's 2 of them that are like that. Other ones needed to be reallocated because the project was done and they had to go somewhere. So down at the bottom, you'll see some of the, no, that's on the next page, I think. These are just all the things that needed to be reallocated. If I can get it to move forward. Yeah, this is just more of the same. I'm trying to get to, there we go. Okay. So these are, the things with the double stars are projects that we discussed as a committee and that are getting reallocated dollars. Am I right? Yeah. So the Argentine Housing Project is one that was in our proposals for the budget year that Brian and I recommended funding for, and that wound up getting funded after staff did their review to make sure it met CDBG requirements. The Northeast, you may have been seeing information in your box about that discussion. The Northeast Housing Program got money in a prior year. They have not yet sold the existing house. So they bought a house, revamped it, and haven't sold it yet. WILBA had some meetings with them to discuss how that project looks going forward, because ordinarily my understanding is we wouldn't continue to give funds unless the house has been sold. Staff came to an understanding, I think, or is coming to an understanding, let's say, with that group to go ahead and continue and give them the funds that were allocated to them rather than reallocating those funds. So $140,000 actually isn't a reallocation. It's giving them what they were going to get that they hadn't spent yet and that we were considering reallocating. The District 6 housing project is new. One of the things that we learned and that we talked about prior to, but that we learned in our June 19th discussion, there was discussion about there being greater impact if you could choose one larger community project and put money into that project. In this case, it was a reallocation of funds, so we needed a project that was going to happen pretty quickly, that we thought kind of had legs and was ready to go. We don't want to leave funds that are already sort of a year behind being spent out there waiting for any longer. So I will say it was not even my idea, but Commissioner Murguia knew I was working on a housing project in Highland Crest. I've talked to many of you about that project. It is, as far as I can tell, ready to go. All we needed is funding. So the committee's recommendation was to reallocate some of those funds into that project that's already ready to go in hopes that we can spend that money quickly and spend it soon. So that is one of the recommendations. The rest of these are items that probably look familiar to you from our usual CDBG discussions. And you'll see there's the 2014 budget and the 2015 is on the far column. I don't know if I'm doing a good job explaining all of that. I think there might be, yeah, one more page. We did talk about security at Willa Gill, and one of the things we did was add $48,000 to that budget item to pay for security because there have been some issues there. You'll see livable neighborhoods. There's a 0 in the 2015 column, but there's actually, if I explain this right, there's money left over that's going to fill that void. So they have enough money to operate both years. We just don't have to allocate them any extra for that 2015 year. So don't think we're not funding livable neighborhoods. It just worked out that they're still going to have the funding to carry them through. So just to be clear on that. Other questions? I'm sure that was, it's clear as mud to me, so I'm sure it's clear as mud to all of you as well.
All right, Commissioner Maddox.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to get clarification from Commissioner Markley. Since the last time we met, maybe something has changed, but you were speaking kind of fast. I was trying to understand. Did you say that we went on and decided to approve the money for the NEDC for 2015?
Yeah, so this is my recollection, and Brian, tell me if you remember differently. So our last meeting when you were on the phone, Commissioner Maddox, our directions to Wilba were kind of to meet with NEDC again and see if we could come up with some way to continue funding that she was comfortable with from a staff perspective and from a regulations perspective. I think that meeting happened. I think it was actually initiated by NEDC. Was it? Yeah, so one way or another, the meeting happened. So I think Wilba just followed our marching orders and had the discussion with you guys, and sounds like something's going to be worked out. I think there are still some details to be worked out from the stuff I saw in my box most recently, just to make sure that everybody understands the details of what's going to be required of them going forward. But I think the committee's understanding was that we were fine with funding them as long as staff was comfortable that we had the right requirements in place to make sure we were not going to be in trouble in the way we spend money.
Okay.
Regulation-wise, I guess I should say.
Okay, and I just wanted to be clear because when we looked at the paperwork, it was a criteria set that actually wasn't in the HUD regulations, which is for them to sell the home. And that was something that was kind of like verbally communicated, and it wasn't put on paper. So the fact that we were using the fact that they had not sold the home to possibly even think about reallocating the funds didn't have a leg to stand on in that regard. But if we decided to go ahead and move forward with that approval, then there's no reason to beat a dead horse. But I did want to discuss the money that was appropriated for the grocery store, and the fact that we talked about reallocating that funding. I believe it was somewhere around $200,000. And I am a person that still roughly supports the grocery store. And I don't know that removing that line item, if we're putting that line item there to eventually fill the funding gap that we have in place for the downtown grocery store, then I don't know that the best decision is to move that line item. And so I wanted to put that on the record. I know we had discussed it, but it hadn't been wrote in stone. And so again, I wanted to announce that. So moving forward in the CDBG, if we're going to continue to put money forward to fill that gap for the grocery store, then I suggest that we continue to put that money there, but only if we have made a real commitment to build the grocery store.
So let me respond to that. I should have discussed that as part of it. So we did have a line item set aside for the grocery store. The concern is we never want to have money sitting unspent. And because of the way the CDBG budget schedule falls, we didn't want to be in a position where we had money hanging out there. What happens is, my understanding is, when the federal government sees you're not spending a whole bunch of money, they think, well, why are we giving you so much anyway? We'll just take it back. So we don't want that situation. So the committee's discussion was we were 100% in favor of putting money into the grocery store, but the way the schedule looks right now and the fact that we don't have a solid situation in that yet, it's almost positive we're not going to need that money this budget year. So we didn't see any sense in setting the money aside and potentially getting it yanked out from under us, knowing that it wasn't going to be spent. So we'd rather spend the money now and put it in the budget next year when we know we have a grocery store to put that money down on than leave it hanging out there and have to reallocate it because it wasn't spent. So that was
Okay.
the discussion that we had.
Okay, well, my only rebuttal to that is, if that was the case, then why did we create the line item for it in the first place when we first put the money to the side? And if we decide to do it next year as well, there's still not a guarantee we will start the grocery store. So if we're making a commitment to filling a funding gap, and part of those financial resources that are coming from the CDBG, we either make a commitment to it or we don't. If we don't, and the rest of the commission feels that way, I agree with it. But if we're going to make a commitment to filling that gap and getting that grocery store, then I suggest that that funding stay there unless there's some kind of stipulations within the HUD regulations that says if money is sitting, then there's a possibility that we would have issues with the HUD department then. If that's the case, then yes, spend it, but if not,
There's definite, as far as I know, there's nothing in the regulation that says that, but I think that's kind of what happens, is that they see that there's money hanging out there and they start to wonder, why are we giving you money if you're not spending it year to year? Because the intent of the government is for us to spend that whole amount every year. So I guess what I would say in response to that is my understanding from the other committee members was that we were making a commitment to the grocery store. We're just not going to set aside money that we know we're not going to spend this budget year.
Okay. So I'm I share the concern about the grocery store money. I'm pleased to hear that there's support for it in the out years, because obviously we have a funding gap right now at the grocery store, which is why we haven't moved forward with it. But that the money from CDBG could be instrumental in getting that deal done. So if there's a commitment moving forward in 2015 to utilize money for that, I think that's great. It speaks to our conversation in terms of using the CDBG money to leverage economic development. Obviously, getting that grocery store across the finish line in downtown is going to leverage other economic development, and I think that will be money well spent. So I know the grocery store task force team has been supportive of the grocery store funding from CDBG, and I'm delighted to hear that this subcommittee is supportive as well. That gives me confidence that it's going to get done when the grocery store is ready to go.
so, and thank you, Mayor. And I guess my question to that is, do you suggest that what is your suggestion? Because I think you were somewhat instrumental in putting that money to the side for the grocery store.
Well, let me ask, I think this is a good question. In the 2015 budget, is there money specifically designated for the grocery store, or is it designated for economic development?
There's money in an economic development didn't we have an urban development or something line item that we?
Can we go back to the previous budget?
Poor Wilba, she was trying to get away with not having to talk. You knew it wasn't going to happen.
There's no money particularly set aside in 2015. We had a budget decrease, so there's a possibility of also a Section 108 loan we could get that would not necessarily have to be sitting in the budget. We could get a loan against our future CDBG dollars to fill gaps too. And this was just for this year, and next year's budget this is just a draft. It still has to go through full commission, for approval, but we didn't really have any money left over after we did our regular activities.
So the amount set aside for the grocery store prior was how much?
We set aside $271,000 last year for a low mod redevelopment project that we sort of said it would be for the grocery store, and we had, I believe, $67,000 in this year's budget.
67 in 2015?
So it was around 300, 350.
300, so my concern then is it identified in 2015 that there will be $325,000 available for the grocery store?
No, sir.
So if we reallocate it, and I just asked the committee your perspective on where you anticipate the $325,000 coming from for the grocery store when it comes online next year.
Well, and I think that's the question, is when it comes online, because even if the project starts next year, that doesn't mean we need the money at the moment the project starts. And I think that was our discussion, is by the time the project gets to that point, not only are we probably going to be into 2016, but we're definitely going to have looked at our reallocations for 2015. So I think we were thinking we'll be reallocating what this year we had all these reallocations for things where there was money left over. When we come to that point in 2015, if we've got hundreds of thousands of dollars of reallocation, that's our obvious choice for the grocery store. And in fact, if it's like this year, it'll be more than we allocated originally for the project. So.
And I don't want to debate that or go back and forth, but I think the money does have to be there at the start of the project, because that's the money that we have to have in place to start the project. I don't know how we start a project with a gap and then say it's there. I think we have to have that money accounted for before we start the project.
Commissioner McKiernan, you've put your light on.
Well, I just wanted to echo that from my perspective, I remember there was unanimous support for setting the money aside, but I think there was a concern that we are not allowed to bank this money. That is to say, well, we didn't need it this year, but we're going to need it next year, so let's just set it aside, don't take it back from us, and we'll keep it. We can't do that.
Right.
So we've got to reallocate that money that was previously set aside for a good project that just wasn't ready at the moment. But there's the full intent now to work within, and we have to realize, as both Commissioner Markley and Wilbur said, with a decreasing annual allotment, we are challenged to still find all of the money that we want to spend on all of the various projects. But I remember there was unanimous commitment to finding every possible dollar from CDBG possible to support the grocery store, because there was unanimous agreement that that was a very powerful economic development activity, and it would be a great use, a leveraged use of those funds, but we couldn't keep that money and just bank it.
There is a regulation called timeliness of expenditure, where we can only have, we should have no more than 1.5% sitting in the letter of credit at the Treasury Department. Every year they check us to see if we're spending on a timely basis. And if you looked at the reappropriations that we submitted to you all, they were about $900,000. That first couple of pages, that first page on CDBG. And our annual allocation this year is only $2 million. So we have to spend money quicker. We can't just let it sit. We discussed this last year when we were going through the budget process, because it's not being spent fast enough.
Well, and that's legitimate. I mean, I think that this is the most heavily regulated money in the entire world. It is the most heavily regulated money in the world. There really are a lot of strings attached, and we do not want to pay a nickel back after we've spent it. And I will say this for Wilba and your staff: you do an outstanding job of making sure we don't give money back. And so that needs to continue. So I accept that explanation and the commitment to continue the funding of the grocery store. I appreciate everyone's support of that. It's greatly needed. It's one of the areas of our community most in need of a grocery store, and we've got to get it done. So, all right, Commissioner Philbrook.
Yes, so going beyond the CDBG monies, as the federal folks told us from HUD, that there's a lot of other avenues that we can visit in those monies, Mayor. And I think that Doug Bach and some of them were more than willing to jump into that and try to help us figure out where those additional funds can come from, because they told us, they meaning the feds, said, we will help you find those avenues. And so we're looking forward to talking with them about that. Well, I just thought I would mention that, so we don't have one line of money. It's a whole bunch of them.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say I understand that in this day and time with tight budgets, there is no money that we can just allow to sit around. But what I'm also hearing say with respect to the grocery store, that even if this money is allocated now because it needs to, because we do not want to be in violation of any federal law that would make us subject to a penalty or to giving it back, that the commitment is here for the grocery store, and that when the project is far enough along, we will find money from somewhere. Because what I've seen as a new commissioner is that part of the funding is the will to fund.
That's right.
And just the priority. So that's what I'm hearing here, and that's why I'm comfortable with it. because of what I'm hearing now, so that's what I expect will happen when we're appropriately situated for that.
Thank you. Okay, in terms of process tonight, I want to thank the committee for working hard on this, and thank you for your next layer of work when you come up with our 5-year plan, which we thought this was hard. The next 5-year plan is going to be even more challenging. But I appreciate you're all working on it and the cooperation to get that done, and the solutions you've come up with the kind of the challenging environment that we have. So we have this presentation. We wanted to bring you up to date today in special session on the work of the committee. The actual vote on this, we will be voting on the 2015 budget with our regular budget later in July. So when we vote on our regular budget, we will come back and this will be a part of it. So during the budget, if there is a need to revisit this, you'll have an opportunity, because we'll be taking notes during our budget workshops in terms of what topics we want to cover. And if we want to come back to the CDBG portion, we will have the opportunity to do that during the budget workshops. But the formal vote on this recommendation by the committee will be before us in July. Okay? Does that make sense in terms of process? All right. Well, thank you. And we are now adjourned from our special session. We have about 10 minutes. We will begin our planning and zoning meeting promptly at 7 o'clock.